Just a sec. You were doing the intro. I'm ready.
All right, we're live.
Hello. Great. Hello and welcome back. I am the lucky person that gets to introduce Sherrard
Glaittli.
from Factor. He's an information architect and a taxonomist. Great. I hope I pronounced that right. And an advocate for user experience. We are both proud alumni of the University of Washington Graduate School of Information. And he's also been involved in the User Experience Design Certificate program at the School of Visual Concepts. And I imagine that your passion for distance running has helped you with your family, especially a toddler, but also in this great area of information architecture for artificial experience. So I'm going to step aside and let you take us down that garden path, Sherrard.
Great. Thank you, Marianne. Hopefully everyone can hear me.
Yes.
All right, great. So here we go. We got the deck. I am going to, I'm not going to make this as much of a lecture on, me reading a set of slides to you about the value of information architecture. Everyone here, well, not everyone here, but a lot of people here have an implicit understanding of the value of information architecture. But I think we all feel a sense of conflict or frustration in the sense that we're not always able to communicate that value of information architecture. My focus of this talk here is ways to spot information architecture in practice, both on the front end and the back end, so that you can more easily advocate for its benefits. So, quick agenda. I'll quickly talk about me, and I'm going to do a little refresher on the definition of information architecture. I know that a lot of people here have information architecture, UX, or library science degrees experience, but not everybody does, and this is a good opportunity to make sure we're all on the same page. I'm going to place it in the context of other related fields in regards to similarities and differences to other UX design disciplines, but also similarity to enterprise architecture and other IT ops work that's related. And with that context in mind, we're going to talk about where you can actually see IA and where you can point to IA and you can start measuring the effectiveness and pointing to it. And lastly, I'm going to be discussing how information architecture directly impacts generative AI projects and how you can advocate for that. So I won't go too long over this since Marianne's already given a pretty good rundown, but I have an MLIS from the University of Washington Information School. I also went to the School of Visual Concepts for the UX certification program, which was great. I started as a taxonomist in 2011, and in that time, I've worked on a lot of enterprise taxonomy and ontology projects. 5 of those years were working at Amazon as a browse developer, as we were called in those days. That's just another word for a taxonomist. I started contracting with Factor in 2020 and joined officially in 2021. As not listed here is that I really enjoy long distance running and trail running. But lastly here, my most recent passion right now is actually about how knowledge graphs, linked data, and retrieval augmented generation can all work together. So basically that knowledge graphs, I'll state this again, but we are in a really exciting moment for knowledge graphs. And I think this is, if any of you have been obsessed with knowledge graph technology, this seems like the moment for the application. So starting off with the definition of information architecture, this is the most common one that I hear cited, and it's right from the Polar Bear book. Information architecture is a design discipline that is focused on making information findable and understandable. Now, that definition, I think for a lot of people, particularly here, resonates really well, because we see we have an innate sense of what the value of findability is and what understandability is. But the problem is that most stakeholders, when you're communicating the value of information architecture, focusing on findability and understandability of information is probably not going to get the results that you want. It's probably going to bury the value of the work that you are doing. So what my goal for this presentation is to start to get us to start thinking about advocating for information architecture in non-librarian or information science terms, so that we can focus on the business value or the organizational value moving forward. So with that definition of IA, it's pretty nebulous, pretty ambiguous for most people. Let's start to crystallize this definition. And I'm going to start by putting it in the context of other fields that is related to. So IA is a discipline closely related to UX design rules. Oftentimes you'll see it lumped in. When I was at the School of Visual Concepts, they were one of the few UX programs that had a dedicated information architecture course. So information architecture is a field that is distinct from UX, but also there's a lot of overlap. And so you may see, information architecture roles follow a lot of the scalability rules that apply to other UX design roles. So for example, on large enterprise teams, you'll have dedicated roles to specific US disciplines, for example. So you'll have dedicated UX researchers, dedicated interaction designers, dedicated information architects. That's a great situation, but more often than not, we're dealing with smaller teams, sometimes a team of one, who has to do the UX research design, the UX interaction design, and the information architecture all as well. So to give you a sense of where information architecture fits in and where information architects fit in, the UX paradigm and the UX designer paradigm is a really, really close, if not almost exact approximation of how that role tends to work in organizations. So information architecture is often mistaken for enterprise architecture, and I wanted to call a distinction between these two. Enterprise architecture is typically the practice of understanding the architecture of all the information systems and how they operate within a larger topology. Information architecture is related, but is focused more on the structure of the information itself, how it's ingested, and how it's used across all those systems. So at Factor, we have a model that we use to sort of to understand the relation of UX and information architecture and enterprise architecture or IT ops within context. So this model that we use is, we think of it sort of as a cake. You have the experience layer, the information layer, and the technical layer. The experience layer is where you see more of the traditional UX design work, UX research, design, UX writing, anything that primarily is focused on the front end experience. The information layer is the section where information architects are mostly focused, which is where you're working directly with the taxonomy, data models, information architecture, and that's one layer above the technical layer, which is where the enterprise architects and IT tends to operate. The implementation of the systems themselves. Now you can see that an information architect sits nicely between these two spaces, almost as if to beat you over the head with the idea that the information architect has to coordinate with, oftentimes sits in between UX teams and IT, and has to coordinate with both to develop the information layer. Oops, excuse me, wrong screen. And here's a breakdown of a lot of the work by those layers. You can see this. This is where the rubber meets the road, so to speak, with information architecture work in the information layer. But we have to coordinate with the other systems. So, with that explanation, I'm sure that a lot of people don't necessarily have a sense of where they can actually see IA. And one of the problems is that good IA is really easy to enjoy, really hard to notice. And by that, I mean that when you are benefiting from a good information architecture practice, you oftentimes don't even know it because you're too busy getting going along on your information need and seeking out what you were searching for. One of my favorite examples of just great IA, and actually a place that I like to go if I ever need a respite and I need to see that, yes, there are places on the internet where the data does matter and there are adults in the room. I like to go to places like McMaster-Carr, which are industrial supply websites. And the reason I like to go to these sites is because you get a sense of what an information architecture project looks like when there is alignment from start to finish. And I'll talk a little bit about what that alignment means. But essentially that that I can tell from front end and back end observations. On the front end, the navigation is intuitive for the domain. The refinements, or rather, the facets of the for each of these product categories is incredibly intuitive and is just very suited to the domain. And lastly, the product page itself is extremely well organized and tailored to the user's needs. I just need to get this tool. I need to find it by these specifications, and then I need to get out. And all of this demonstrates an alignment between, from the very start, between, that it shows that there's an alignment between the designers of the project, the business, the client, the business client of the project, and there's an advocate for the stakeholders, and that alignment is there from the very start. Comparing that to taking a look at the same product category on Amazon.com. Now, if anyone is from Amazon here, I'm not trying to put Amazon on blast. These are two different environments, but I feel like they demonstrate how an information architect practice can be discerned just from looking at these two pages. One of the things I'll say here is that there is a lack of an information strategy here. And I think I want to correct that and say that it's not a lack of an information strategy, but it does show what their information strategy is, which may be devaluing their information strategy. So here on the front end, I pulled the same search for sulfuric acid gloves, because that was what I was looking for. Gloves that are safe to use with noxious chemicals. And in the previous example, we had the sulfuric acid as an attribute that was selected. After I looked up for acid gloves, it's like, oh, which acid do you want to use? Well, sulfuric acid. Okay, then it presents gloves results based on that criteria. Searching for sulfuric acid gloves on the Amazon marketplace is a random hodgepodge. And it's the information strategy here is different from McMaster Carr in the sense that ostensibly the information strategy here is to provide industrial supply equipment, in a relevant way to customers, ostensibly. But what you actually see here is that the information strategy is actually, this is primarily an advertising space for marketplace sellers. And you can tell that because all those search results at the top are like above the fold are all sponsored, all of them, including some merchandising up here at the top. When you do start to search below, the search results are basically random gloves. And what this says is not that Amazon doesn't care about the quality of its data, as much as Amazon is an extremely large business with multiple businesses that are oftentimes at cross purposes with each other. And in this case, the advertising business has shown that it is the larger priority here than the findability of the products. The findability and the conversion of the products is incidental and probably just a side effect of just the network effect of Amazon. So they don't feel that they need to apply a rigorous information architecture strategy just by virtue of their traffic. All right, so let's see if there's anything else I missed. So with that said, you know how to qualitatively take a look and see information architecture, and you can see where information architecture has benefits to the user, but how else are you able to measure its effectiveness? There are innate challenges to measuring the impact of information architecture work, especially for launches. When you're launching, oftentimes, you don't have metrics prior to compare against. So, oftentimes launching work, the measurement for success there is measuring the functionality that has been enabled, and that is often the case with a launch. In the case, but oftentimes for lack of quantitative data, you can still perform qualitative measurements, for a given launch, for example, by exploring, say a competitive assessment of a similar website. I would start by noting what are the business objectives that you have. Is the customer experience related to those objectives? Then pull a walkthrough and see how well does the customer experience actually align with the goals of those business objectives. And you'd be amazed just how much information that you can get out just by walking through a given experience and mapping it to the business objectives of the project. Just that alone, no UX research in the traditional sense, can really help you get a sense of the criteria by which to judge the effectiveness of your information architecture project. And lastly, quantitative measurements. I forgot to mention, but the qualitative measurements, these are qualitative, but I highly recommend that for qualitative measurements, if you are able to assign numerical scores to be able to demonstrate how things fit within the qualitative measurements, that's very, very helpful for communicating the benefits of an ontology or a taxonomy without quantitative data. All right, and as far as quantitative measurements, one thing that's extremely helpful, is search query analysis and click-through and abandon rates for browse and search terms. So, when you're figuring out how, you're trying to measure the effectiveness of an IA project, oftentimes what you can do is you can take a look at what terms are coming in from clients, and then compare that to the rest of the browse behavior or search behavior on the site, and make inferences based on that. So search query analysis, let's say you have a given term for fidget spinners. All right. You're noticing that you're getting thousands and thousands of terms for fidget spinners. And when you look at the search term analysis for the term fidget spinner, you notice that the abandon rate is really high. That might tell you that for the search term fidget spinners, that you are not getting the relevant search results that you are looking for. So this is the kind of information that you can start to tease out through a walkthrough, through qualitative measurements, through quantitative measurements, to start to have concrete things that you can actually point to in your information architecture project. So that said, I think it's important that we also talk about information architecture and generative AI. Excuse me. There we go. So IA and AI complement each other tremendously well. And by AI, I want to clarify, I'm talking specifically about generative AI technologies, mostly large ML systems as well. The great thing about information architecture, and I think as far as communicating the value of information architecture to artificial intelligence projects, is that the main value is that information architecture techniques combined with LLMs in the form of RAG, which is called which stands for Retrieval Augmented Generation, and I'll get into that in a bit, allows the LLM to consult a knowledge graph before generating its output. Imagine that. So instead of just doing a statistical analysis of the language model and figuring out what would be the statistically most accurate answer or appropriate response, there is a retriever that sits between the input and the prompt and mediates that and says, okay, based on this input, look up against this knowledge graph. If the information, and only frame your context within the information in this knowledge graph. If the information does not exist in this knowledge graph, say you don't know. And that sort of thing. Really exciting stuff. So that is one of the main, I think, value adds that information architecture brings to artificial intelligence. And this translates to better accuracy, but also better compliance, which I'll get to in a minute. Oops, excuse me. Oop. I am losing control. Hold on. All right. Excuse me. So I know a lot of people here have some experience with playing with large language models and even some experience with retrieval augmented generation. For those who don't, I wanted to give you a very basic model to just give you a sense of what we're talking about here. So, when a user, if I click on something, it changes, excuse me. If the user generates an input, the input goes to the RAG, which analyzes the input and frames it in the context of the knowledge graph. It says, okay, take this input, compare it against this information in the knowledge graph to confirm, or use this knowledge graph as an authoritative source for your answer. Provides that to the language model, which comes out to the output. This is a very simplified diagram, but to give you a sense of how RAG technologies work. And AI itself also complements information architecture. One of the things about information architecture as a practice is that there are parts of it that have been cost prohibitive. Building a knowledge graph. These are things that generative AI can assist with. However, I have put an asterisk here to indicate that building a knowledge graph from scratch using a large language model is probably going to take you more time than if you actually rather use the knowledge graph, the large language model as a springboard for building your knowledge graph. It can help you classify your data to your knowledge graph and help you with maintaining your knowledge graph. And Gen AI models and frameworks can be used to reduce cost barriers for each of these entity extraction, edge extraction, etc., data cataloging, and data governance. And one of the things that I want to say to get people excited here is that right now there are open models and open RAG frameworks that are evolving fast, and you can go in there and you can go in and you can start to see what people are developing. It's very exciting. So with that, advocating for AI. AI as a practice has often struggled to advocate its worth, at least in my experience when I've worked on projects. Pitches for IA research and design have often been couched in terms of making things findable. As I said earlier, librarians understand the innate value of findability and understandability. But for us to successfully pitch IA projects, we have to align project goals with stakeholder goals from the start of the project. And that has to result in shared and defined outcome and milestones that stay with everybody throughout the project. So post-Gen AI, nothing's changed. If anything, we have more of an opportunity for information architecture practice. RAG and related frameworks allow us to build models that can help make these more accurate and more reliable and trustworthy. The languages are open, the models are open. We are in a position where we can start to not only model how these technologies interact, but actually model the models and the technologies ourselves. And lastly, generative AI presents a lot of risks that the practice of information architecture is particularly suited to mitigate, meeting hallucinations with retrieval augmented generation and other techniques, as I mentioned earlier. But I think more importantly, this needs to be framed within the context of complying with policies and laws pertaining to trustworthy AI. There are policies and legal definitions of what's called trustworthy AI that are being written right now, both in the EU and in the United States. I've included some links to those as well in my resources here. But that is one of the main value adds I want to focus on, is that the reliability and the trustworthiness of these AIs is becoming legally defined, and information architects are going to have a huge part in compliance. So for next steps, how to advocate for IA in an AI world. The value of IA practice takes a keen eye and is often lost in a project. The value of an IA project is set by tying the project goals to shared business goals, concrete deliverables, and milestones from the very start of the project. Generative AI's projects present a huge value opportunity for the IA practice. The need for knowledge graphs for RAG, improving trustworthiness. And then I would take a look around, start playing with this stuff. You don't have to be a computer scientist to understand how these systems work, and to understand, just sit around and play with this stuff and watch YouTube videos, and you will start to get a sense of how these RAG models work. Lastly, I wanted to leave off on one exciting potential of RAG networks as well, and RAG modeling, which is networks of networks. So we can build these RAG models, which are essentially networks of LLMs and knowledge graphs and other systems meant to keep the LLM in check. But now there are discussions of creating these networks of networks, which are essentially LLMs that can have agents that interact with other LLMs or outside information retrieval systems. So there's a lot of opportunity here. So with that, thank you very much for having me.
Fantastic presentation, Sherrard. Thank you so much. I don't know if we have time for some questions. We're running a little over. Yep. So I guess I have one question, and that's the benefit of being the moderator, and that is, how can information architects become included in the early design, development, and deployment stage of AI applications, either within their organization? Like, what are your recommendations for people that want to be, as they say in the musical Hamilton, in the room where it happens?
Yeah, and I think this really comes down to, and I know that this is a buzzword, but I can't help but use it, is about alignment. Starting at the very start of the project and seeing, what are the goals of stated project? What are the stated business objectives of that project? If you're in the room and those objectives are being developed, the best way is to have somebody in the room who has this perspective to be able to make sure that when that they can tie information architecture to those explicit project business goals, and the more specific, the better. If you're creating a new market, a new product space in the marketplace, for example, or a new category in a content tagging system, you may not have measurable impacts right there from just the launch of it, because how can you compare from nothing? But what you can do is you can still advocate for the work and couch it in terms of of what business goals are going to be met. And so in that case, if there's not like an improved click-through rate or anything of that sort, you can say, we have this new functionality, we have entered this new product category space because of this information work. So I think the best way that I would say is just, if you can couch. Actually, I have the best thing I've ever heard was advice that I got from Gary Carlson, which was the best way to talk about taxonomy is not to talk about taxonomy. And to me, that I think really, really, really gets to the heart of it, is that the best way to talk about the information architecture and the value of the information architecture is not to talk about the information architecture itself, but what it enables, and focusing on that from the very start. Because as you're going through, if people have preconceptions of a taxonomy or information architecture, because people do have preconceptions no matter where they come from, and if you start talking about it, they're going to start bringing those beliefs. But if instead of focusing on the taxonomy or the ontology, where people get nervous and they want to prove that they're smart and they know what they're talking about, and it muddies the discussion, the best is just to focus on the goals that are being met and how the information architecture work meets those goals, and to do that periodically through milestones through the project.
Excellent. Great. And there's wonderful comments. We are running a little behind, so I'm going to say thank you so much on behalf of all of us. Hope you can stick around and answer some of the questions that are in the comments and in the Q&A, but this has been fantastic.
Thank you for having me.
Bye now.